I didn't notice when it happened. There wasn't a grand moment, no collision or dramatic turning point. Just a quiet Tuesday afternoon in 1968, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, looking at two envelopes. One was an acceptance letter from a small art college in Brighton. The other was a formal offer from the local council's planning department. Steady work. Pension. Respected position. I chose the second one. It seemed like the obvious thing to do. I grew up in Nottingham, in a terraced house where the bathroom was out the back and you could hear everything your neighbors said through the walls. My father worked at the Raleigh factory. My mother took in sewing. We weren't poor, but we were careful. Money was something you thought about before you spent it, and jobs were something you kept, not something you experimented with. I used to draw. Not in any particularly gifted way, but constantly. On the backs of envelopes, in the margins of school books, on scraps of newspaper when there was nothing else. I drew the street outside our house, the way the chimney pots lined up against the sky. The old man who sold vegetables from a cart every Thursday. My sister's hands when she was reading. Small, unremarkable things. But I loved the act of it, the way you could take something fleeting and pin it down, make it permanent. At school, I was middling at most things. Mathematics baffled me. History felt like memorizing lists. But in art class, something settled. Mr. Harrison, the art teacher, had served in the war and barely spoke. He'd walk around the classroom with his hands behind his back, pausing occasionally to look over your shoulder. One afternoon, he stopped behind me for longer than usual. I was drawing the view from the window, the schoolyard, the fence, a tree losing its leaves. When I turned around, he just nodded once and walked away. That was the closest thing to praise I'd ever received. I started staying late after school, working in the art room while the corridors emptied. I liked the quiet. The smell of turpentine and paper. The way the light changed as the afternoon wore on. Mr. Harrison never said much, but he'd leave books open on the side table, Hopper, Lowry, Sickert. I'd look at them while cleaning brushes. I began to imagine, in a vague and half-formed way, that this might be something I could do. Not fame or recognition, just this. Making things. Observing. Translating the world onto paper. When I was 17, Mr. Harrison mentioned the college in Brighton. He didn't make a fuss about it. Just said they had a foundation course, that he thought I'd manage it all right, and that I should apply if I fancied it. I took the prospectus home and hid it in my drawer for 3 weeks before I told my parents. My father didn't say much at first. He sat in his chair by the fire, listening as I tried to explain what the course was, what it might lead to. When I finished, he looked at me for a long moment and said, "And what do you do after that?" I didn't have a good answer. I said something vague about teaching, or freelance work, or perhaps working for a design studio. He nodded slowly, then asked, "And how do you live while you're sorting that out?" My mother was gentler but more anxious. She worried about me going so far from home, about how I'd afford lodgings, about what would happen if it didn't work out. She wasn't unkind. She was frightened. Frightened that I'd end up struggling, that I'd waste years chasing something uncertain, that I'd regret it. Then the council job came up. A junior role in the planning office, filing, drafting, assisting with surveys. It wasn't glamorous, but it was secure. My uncle worked in the same building and had put in a word. Everyone around me seemed relieved when I received the offer. It felt like a solution to a problem I hadn't quite articulated. My father clapped me on the shoulder. My mother stopped looking worried. I sat at the kitchen table with both letters in front of me. The art college felt like a door opening onto something unknown. Exciting, yes, but also precarious. Irresponsible, even. The council job felt like the adult choice. The sensible one. The one that wouldn't let anyone down. I folded the Brighton letter back into its envelope and wrote a polite note declining the place. I accepted the council position. I told myself I could still draw in the evenings, at weekends. It didn't have to be one or the other. The job wasn't unpleasant. The office was large and drafty, full of wooden desks and the clatter of typewriters. I worked with maps and planning applications, checking measurements, filing reports. My colleagues were decent people, some funny, some dull, all reliably present. We'd have tea at 10:30 and again at 3. On Fridays, a few of us would go to the pub. I drew less than I'd expected. At first, I told myself I was just tired, still adjusting. Then weeks became months. I'd come home, eat dinner, watch television, go to bed. The sketchbook sat on the shelf. Occasionally, I'd take it down with good intentions, but the energy wasn't there anymore. The quiet urgency I'd felt at school had faded into something vaguer, easier to ignore. I met Susan at a friend's wedding when I was 24. She was a primary school teacher, warm and practical, with a laugh that made you feel like you'd said something cleverer than you had. We married 2 years later. We bought a small semi-detached house on the edge of town. We had 2 children. I was promoted twice. We took holidays in Cornwall. We hosted Christmas. We worried about the mortgage, the car, the boiler. Life accumulated around us, as it does. I became someone I recognized but didn't quite remember choosing to be. A husband. A father. A senior planning officer. I wasn't unhappy. But there was a feeling, faint and persistent, like something slightly out of tune. I'd catch myself staring out of the office window, watching the rooftops, the way the clouds moved, and I'd think, just for a moment, about drawing it. Then someone would ask me a question, or the phone would ring, and the moment would pass. Susan once asked me, early in our marriage, why I'd stopped drawing. I told her I'd just got out of the habit. She suggested I take it up again, maybe join an evening class. I said I would, but I never did. It felt too late by then. Not literally, I was only in my 30s, but emotionally. Like I'd closed a door so gently I hadn't noticed it locking. I've thought about it a great deal in recent years. What would have happened if I'd chosen Brighton? If I'd taken that course, lived in a cramped bedsit near the sea, spent my days learning to see properly, to make things that mattered, even if only to me. I don't imagine it would have been easy. I probably would have struggled for money. Worked in pubs or shops to pay the rent. Perhaps I'd have taught art in schools, scraping by on temporary contracts. Maybe I'd have shared studio space with other artists, sold a few pieces at local exhibitions, never quite made a living from it but kept going anyway. I might have traveled more, moved to London for a while, then back to the coast. Perhaps I'd have met someone different, another artist, or a writer, someone who understood that kind of life. Or perhaps I'd have ended up alone, which wouldn't necessarily have been worse. The man I could have been wouldn't have had the house, or the pension, or the garden I've spent years tending. He wouldn't have had the same friends, or the same children, possibly no children at all. He'd have lost things too. Security. Routine. The quiet comfort of knowing what comes next. But he would have kept something I let go of. A version of himself that hadn't learned to ignore his own instincts. A life built around looking closely at the world, rather than administering it. He'd have been different, not better, not happier, but more intact. More himself. I wonder, sometimes, if he thinks about me. If somewhere in the version of the world where he exists, he ever imagines the suburban life, the steady job, the family gatherings. Whether he feels the same quiet absence I do, or whether he sleeps more soundly than I ever have. I'm 73 now. Susan passed away 4 years ago. The children live far enough away that visits require planning. The house is too large for one person, but I can't quite bring myself to leave it. Most days are spent in familiar patterns: breakfast, a walk, the newspaper, lunch, gardening if the weather's decent, television in the evening. It's a calm life. An empty one. I found my old sketchbook a few months ago, tucked at the back of a cupboard. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table, still here after all these years, and turned the pages slowly. The drawings were clumsy, enthusiastic, full of a kind of attention I'm not sure I'm capable of anymore. I looked at them for a long time, trying to recognize the person who'd made them. I didn't feel regret, exactly. Regret suggests wishing you could undo something. I don't think I'd go back, even if I could. But there's a sadness that sits differently. Not for what went wrong, but for what was quietly set aside. For the person I might have been, who I never got to meet. If you've stayed with me this far, perhaps you understand what I mean. Perhaps you've felt it too, that sense of living slightly adjacent to yourself. If these reflections mean something to you, perhaps this is where they are supposed to exist. You might consider subscribing. Not for my sake, but because these thoughts need somewhere to go, and maybe they belong with people who recognize them. I suppose what I'm left with is a question. Not for me, it's too late for that. But for you. Which version of yourself are you quietly becoming a stranger to?